Okay, this is Brent Rains for Alternate Perceptions Online Magazine, and we have an interview this evening, which is January the 20th, 2023. Katie Paige. She's a Colorado MUFON state director and a MUFON state star investigator. And she's the host of MUFON's What's Up radio broadcast. And she's the author of Letters of Love and Light, 4 Decades of UFO Encounters, Experiences, and Sightings Shared with ufologist R. Leo Sprinkle, Ph.D. And she's currently working on a second book, which is entitled High Strangeness. Oh, I should have my glasses on, I guess.
I feel you. I feel your pain.
High Strangeness, a Colorado ranch, the Colorado Skinwalker Ranch, craft, cattle, copters, cryptids, and cover-ups. And of course, how you became involved in ufology is quite intriguing. It's been a family affair, and I did a series of interviews recently with a ufologist, 14 actually, named Peter Jordan, who lives over in New Jersey. We've just done recently our 6th interview, and they're all posted on Alternate Perceptions. And he reminded me of the Clearview Ranch case in Colorado. And so you do mention it in your book about Dr. Sprinkle and how you became involved in ufology. And anyway, I was gonna, your book is really a lot of good things about Dr. Sprinkle. I had quite a bit of correspondence myself. This first one was actually a letter from him. If you can see it, back in 1968.
Well, maybe pull it back just a little bit. It's a little blurry for me.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
And yes, got his letterhead at the top. Yeah. And I think it was Look magazine or maybe Life magazine at the time. I read about his seeing UFOs. So I wanted him to describe them to me. So he even drew a little illustration down here at the bottom. Very nice of him to take his time with a 15-year-old.
Oh, that's what I love most about Leo. I went down to his archives there at the Heritage Center in Laramie, Wyoming, kind of for selfish reasons, because I wanted to get all the documents on the ranch, the Clearview Ranch. Mm-hmm. But I got lost in all those letters, and he kept all his response letters. I mean, we're talking letters from the late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 74 boxes full. And I'm sure your file's in there with your name on it. And who knows, maybe I have photographs of your letters. And I just got lost for like 3 years reading these letters. So yeah, he just was the most generous person and just responded to everybody. And in fact, there's a chapter in the book, Letters from Children. Yeah.
Well, he actually put me in touch with a group out in Federal Way, Washington, back in, I'm not even sure when exactly it was, but anyway, that organization, the UFO Contact Center International, with at the time in the beginning, it was a husband and wife who later got divorced, but they were still close. That started it, Eileen Garut now, but she was Edwards then, and Dan Edwards, her husband, and they had worked with, Bob Gribble, who was started up that, phone network where police and airplane pilots and just regular civilians could call them up on the phone and report UFOs anywhere in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so they got the feeling that they should also start a group to help the abductees, contactees. And Dr. Leo Sprinkle wrote to me, said I might want to, become a part of their group. So I did.
Oh, and
cool. and like with your seeing all the letters that Dr. Sprinkle dealt with, I have got to see all the letters that Eileen used to write to people, please send me an issue of your magazine, or can you give me an information, or I had this sighting or experience, or I had a strange dream. And I mean, she would send out, a lot of times 2-page letters to these people,
Right. Yeah.
and a very time-consuming process.
Right. Yeah, I admired that so much same thing, like a page or two or three, and to
Hmm.
thousands of people. Who has the time? And so we would sit in his office, and he would sit there, and he had somebody, he would dictate, and they would type it up. So he had a typist do that for him, but still very time consuming. And the fact that he responded to just everybody, and took the time. You just don't see that anymore. You really don't. Everybody's just so busy and has their noses to the phones and everything. So it's, not only, I think letter writing is just a lost art in of itself, the old fashioned,
Yeah.
snail mail. And so.
Yeah. And really his situation kind of reminded me of Dr. Berthold Schwartz, who also, like Dr. Sprinkled, was a consultant with, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
Yeah.
And he was a psychiatrist, and he, wrote a 2-volume book, UFO Dynamics, and he, went around and interviewed people who had encounters and was very serious about it. And of course, he would write these long, beautiful letters, and I had for about 37 years engaged in correspondence with him. But when it came to the internet, he was lost. If I didn't
Yeah.
call him up on the phone, or
Right.
or write him
Right.
an actual letter and put a postage stamp on it and stick it in an envelope, that was it. He was lost there, but a brilliant man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so intrigued by what it's become it's a real controversy on the Clearview, as they call it, ranch story. And I know there's been different opinions expressed, but when Peter Jordan pointed out, well, there's a lady in Colorado who actually had been there and had some firsthand experiences. So, um, you know, got excited and wanted to contact you and do an interview and see what you might be able to tell us from your experience. Because I mean, I read like the stories in the April Bulletin about
Right.
their scene.
You probably have the whole official document. I got the document from John Schuessler, and of course all of Dr. Leo Sprinkle's original notes and that. So I guess, if you would like, I can kind of start out by telling you what my connection is to the ranch.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Let's see. Go ahead and
Okay.
have
So
at it.
of course, the years of where the peak of the high strangeness, where it was really, really active, was from 1975 to 1978. And my mother and father divorced, and my mom was a computer operator at United Airlines and started dating a gentleman there. And the gentleman owned the ranch with him and his wife were separated at the time, and his separated spouse had a new love interest, and they had 3 sons. Well, the 2 youngest sons lived with my mother, my sister, and I during the week to attend a larger school district. And then we would take the boys back and forth from time to time to the ranch property. And we spent Thanksgiving together one year with everybody, his mother, the new love interest, and my mom and her boyfriend. It was the 70s. What can I say? And so my sister and I, my older sister and I, had some unique, scary experiences on the ranch property. And we were threatened and warned never to talk about what happened there. And I never knew, or my sister and I never knew anybody knew anything about the ranch. We never knew it was investigated. We never knew APRO was involved, or Leo Sprinkle, or, Peter Van Arsdale, or John Durr, or anybody. And so it wasn't until, I've always experienced a lot of paranormal things. So I kind of started out researching the paranormal world. And like so many of us do, I got lost in documentaries and things on, television and that. And I learned about MUFON in 2011. I joined MUFON in 2012 and came right in as a field investigator because I was wondering, like, what was all that we were experiencing? What was happening out there in Elbert County? So the actual location of the ranch, even though it was dubbed the Clearview Ranch, and I've also heard it referred to as the Rocky Mountain Ranch, but it is in Elbert County, Colorado, in a small town called Kiowa. And what I was naive because I believed that the activity was just located on the family's ranch itself. But come to find out through interviews, and I've been researching it now for almost a decade, that the whole town of Kiowa, and not only Kiowa, but Elizabeth and Rama and Simla, and even down to Franktown. So this whole area of Elbert County and into Douglas County, this whole region experienced strange and unusual high strangeness activity. So what I thought was an isolated incident that just dealt with the family actually affected hundreds of people. I have an Excel spreadsheet of over 250 people. And why that's important is because when I dug up some of the early notes about the ranch and the family, there were some rumors that, these people were on drugs and we can't believe anything that they're saying, and, da da da. Well, number one, my mother's boyfriend at the time, I mean, he, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he later became an Aurora police officer, and he drove around with his briefcase and a Vespa. Like, this man did not use drugs. Just because the family, they moved from Aurora, which was a very, a big city, and they moved to the countryside because they always wanted to have a cattle ranch. So they had, in the mid 70s, they were growing their hair a little longer, and maybe, the small town people started rumors about this family. But I knew the family personally, and there was no drugs involved here. And not only that, but like I said, this phenomenon that was occurring up there in Elbert County affected more than just the ranch. I mean, Linda Moulton Howe, that's where she was an investigative journalist at the time, and in fact did a film called A Strange Harvest. And so she had interviewed Bill Waugh, the undersheriff of Elbert County, and George Yarnell at the time. Those both of them are in her film, and she was really involved in the enormous amount of cattle mutilations that were occurring out there at the time, and not just cattle, but sheep and horse, even dog was reported. And then just a few years back, I learned of another gentleman named Jeffrey Sailors that had a nearby ranch as well that he dubbed the Buffalo Ranch. And he had very similar types of activity. So it's just snowballed. It's been a rabbit hole since then. So yes, there was some controversy and some doubt at the beginning of this family, but like I said, it's just impacted so many more on such a larger scale.
Yeah, I saw in your book that, you and your sister, you had from 75 to 78, like you were 9 to 12, and she was 15 to 18, and you'd had these, I think you described them as high strange experiences. I know that certainly the people on the ranch with mysterious boxes, black boxes, and the Bigfoot seemed to be affected by or controlled by these black boxes, and craft and some mutilations, of course. What was it that the two of you had experienced?
Right. Well, the family, when they purchased the property, the first thing they experienced were these humming sounds. Sometimes they would get so loud you couldn't talk over it and whatnot, and these bangs underground. But for my sister and I, the most significant things, two of them happened during the day. Two events happened with my sister with me, and one, my sister was not with me. But one event was a spring day. It had to have been the weekend. It was a snowy, in Colorado, we get this wet, heavy snow in the springtime. In fact, Colorado, some of our biggest snowstorms are in the springtime. We get those, April and May snowstorms. So we were out there just flipping the Frisbee back and forth. And it's just a minor thing, but we remember looking down at the ground and just seeing this large snowless circle where it was just dry dirt, where no vegetation grew. And we just remembered noting, like, this is really strange. And in the briefing document that I received and some of the notes from the archives, they actually measured that to be 75 feet in diameter. And in the notes, it said there were drops of blood in the snow outside the circle, and there were two of those spotted on the ranch property. So that was just an unusual thing that we witnessed. The scariest night for us, I believe it was the mother's birthday. It was super, super late at night, or even in the early hours of the morning, and the adults were playing board games in the front of the ranch house. The three boys and my sister and I was the youngest of the kids. We went up and we were hanging out in the boys' bedroom when that humming sound started up. And, you know, we were like, uh-oh, because that was sort of a precursor to other strange things happening. And sure enough, all the electricity in the house went out. And in the boys' and the window was in the front of the ranch house, and it was like the brightest light I had ever seen, brighter than the sun, coming through that window. And at that time, this disembodied electrical, weird sounding, it sounded like it came out of every orifice of the house, basically gave us this warning. And what's interesting about it is that's the scariest night and the one my sister and I remember the most. So when John Schuessler gave me the briefing document and it actually recounts what the words were, I was like floored by that. You know, it basically said, attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us. And I just remember our house was in Englewood, Colorado. It is now Centennial, but it's about an hour away from the ranch property. We left that night terrified out of our minds. And when I returned back to our home, I walked through the door and collapsed to the ground, and I went paralyzed for a good 5 or 10 minutes. And I wasn't able to speak. And my mom and my sister were like, Katie, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? And I couldn't even speak. I was trying to tell them, you know, what did you eat? What did you eat? And went up to my room, had my first full-blown migraine at that time. And what's interesting, until just recently when Skinwalker at the Pentagon came out, I always compartmentalized my different experiences. I never connected the things I was experiencing at my home to what was occurring on the ranch. I separated them. And so at my home, after that evening on the ranch, I started to see these tall shadow figures in my room. I never slept alone anymore. I always slept with my big sister, you know, and I would see these balls of orange orbs, things like this. So it wasn't until they reported other people like at Skinwalker Ranch and other high strangeness locations, and there's several across the country, that the other people were experiencing these same things. I was like, oh my goodness, maybe they're connected. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the final thing that I experienced was in the daytime. I was with the youngest son and my mom's boyfriend at the time, and we were in this pickup truck with the hound dogs driving around so in the back of the ranch house they had ponderosa pines, and we were driving through the trees, through the ponderosa pines, and I don't remember why, but we all got out of the truck. Again, it wasn't the humming noise, but it was like a bee sound noise, and we looked back, and the tree line was this box like this with lights on it emitting this noise. And I just remember being yelled at to get back in the truck, get back in the truck, get back in the truck. There's the box. So we're hustling to get back in the truck, and we look back into the tree line and the box was just gone. And I didn't talk about this for years because it just sounds so bizarre, like who's gonna, you know, a box disappearing. But when I heard that the sheriff, Bill Law, experienced the same thing, and then this was experienced too at Skinwalker Ranch and also with Trey Hudson down south with these strange box type activity. I was like, okay, I'll talk about it now. You know.
Yeah.
So that's just a few things that happened. And of course, you know, during the week, we'd always hear about police being called or mutilations being done or whatever. But it was always like, hush, hush, don't tell the kids, like they didn't want to scare us. I was just a little girl at the time.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's some pretty high strange stuff. And you know, at that age too, and experiencing all of that. And that black box with the lights, can you describe it a little, like the size and maybe where the lights were located and the colors?
Yeah, in my memory, and I know I'm not going to go off with the briefing documents, I'm just going to go by what I remember seeing.
Yeah.
It was, you know, 18, 20 inches long, maybe 8 inches wide, like bigger than a shoebox. So, you know, it wasn't huge. And I recall it being dark with lit like yellow and white lights, like kind of just flashing and making this like bee noise, like almost on like if something is like electronic, you know, that kind of hum like a generator or something.
Yeah.
That's what I remember seeing. Now, but it was just for a short time that I saw this, and what I recall the most was, just get in the truck, get in the truck, get in the truck, that kind of thing, and the fear of that. So it was just very brief that I saw that. So, and the best thing for me of all of my research and all this was just confirmation, because for all these years, it was like these vague memories that I had and my sister had, and we were, it was like this big secret that we carried. And to get confirmation that anybody knew anything about it at all was stunning. I'll never forget when I read that in that book, how that impacted me. I sat on the living room floor for like 2 hours in complete shock that anybody knew anything about that property. I could not believe it, and so it's just been this mission ever since to learn as much as I can about it. And it's just
Yeah.
one thing after another, these strange unmarked helicopters that were menacing people, and orange orbs flying off the property, and just on and on and on. And the military connection. I mean, that's the biggest thing for me, is what the heck was the military out there, and why was the Colorado Bureau of Investigations aware of the property? Why was there soldiers from Camp Carson out on the property? What was going on? I really do want answers to that.
Yeah. And the box you saw, or other people saw, were they just laying on the ground, or were they actually levitating? Or
Well, and the one I saw was in the tree line. I suppose levitating, because it was off the ground, to my recollection.
oh,
But the box in the briefing document, they talk about a couple actually. One was behind the ranch house sitting on the ground, and one was, the one that was seen on the ground that dropped the Sasquatch to its knees. These are lethal, do not approach it, that kind of thing. I never witnessed the ET beings that supposedly the adult in the situation had a conversation with. I never witnessed that. However, I can say I witnessed and experienced other strange type of things, and that's why Dr. Leo Sprinkle decided to hypnotize me for an hour and a half to see what I could recall. So that was an interesting experience,
but everything we're talking about now, these were conscious memories that you had.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. Yep.
Wow. Well, I way back, I think beginning in February 1970, I started a correspondence with a young college student from Paris, Texas, named Tom Adams, and he and some of his college friends were going out to Colorado back in 1970, and years following that, he started a magazine later called Stigmata and Crux, and he was very interested in mutilation. Started with Snippy, and
right.
some of the things that were going on were, as Peter Jordan said when he read my recent article on what he shared and others, in the San Luis Valley, and in that area around Almosa, and
Right.
yeah, there were events that these college students had and other people in the area that is similar to, he compared to the Skinwalker Ranch.
Interesting. What's fascinating about that to me, because the San Luis Valley and Crestone and these areas, they are on the southern side of Colorado Springs, and Elbert County is further east. So you have this all these military bases in Colorado Springs, and then you have Alamosa and Crestone and San Luis Valley over here, and then over here is Elbert County. So it's like on either side of those military bases. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I wasn't really interested in the cattle mutilation phenomenon for a very long time. It was just sort of too much for me for the longest time. I don't know why. And I kind of thought, well, that's Chuck Zukowski and Christopher O'Brien's wheelhouse, and even just recently, I've heard that, that was 100% the military. There's nothing to that. There's no high strangeness to that. But from the interviews I've done with a few of the ranchers out there, some of them are just so high strangeness that it just can't be explained by the military. So maybe I kind of come to the conclusion that, I think two things were happening at the same time: unexplained phenomenon and military involvement and activity. I think both were happening simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's the thing. You have to have a flexibility in the
Yeah,
people because
right.
there's such strange things that are happening, and a lot of people they want everything to fit in a nice tidy little box,
Right. I had to
that
let that go a long time ago because you're right. And things change the more you learn. Like you get a new piece of evidence or a new witness coming forward or something, and you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. That just blew my theory out of the water. And so you do have to change and be adaptable to what the evidence shows. And I've always been one as a researcher and investigator to say wherever the data leads, whatever answers I get, I'm okay with. If I find out, I was actually flying. Sometimes I do my best thinking on airplanes when you're looking out the window. You know, you're on a flight, and I'm looking down in the tree line, thinking, man, you could have, you know, infrared and heat signatures. If there were Sasquatch and Bigfoot, we could find them in the trees and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, how much of that activity out there on the ranch could have been produced by who knows who. I'm not blaming anybody, Air Force or whatever. You can dress up in Sasquatch suits. You can dress up like aliens. You can do disembodied electrical voices. You can do these weird boxes. You could probably stage a lot of this stuff. But then the question becomes, why would you do that? Are they trying to scare the tar out of people and get them off the property? Because if that's the case, and that was a theory at the time, why don't they just come offer to buy the property outright? Here's a big chunk of money. We want this land. Get off of it.
Mhm.
It just, none of it makes any sense to me. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's the problem with this. So much of this is when you look at the whole big picture, it's like, it's so hard to and challenging to try to make sense out of it and put it in a box
Right. It really is.
where everything just fits, in a nice little tidy package that.
Right. And I've heard from two people that are quite interesting that were both military people that are in the field, and I think I can name them. One at a Laughlin conference, I kind of cornered Richard Doty, and I know, people, well, he's a disinformation officer, take it or leave what he says, but
Yeah.
I was just curious if he was aware of the property, if he knew about it. That's what I wanted to know. And he basically said that he was aware of it. And so that's interesting. Why? And I also got that same, I was in New York at the Pine Bush UFO Festival, and Cheryl Costa was sitting at the table with me. And she goes, oh, you're Katie, you're Katie, and she goes, we knew about that property. And I'm like, who's we and why did you know about it? And two things Richard said to me. He's like, well, if you want to find out more about what was going on out there, because there was two A7Ds that crashed out there, and in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files, they said that there were two A7Ds that crashed in pursuit of a UFO. And I thought to myself, well, if two A7Ds crashed, there certainly must be information about that somewhere. So I ended up finding the newspaper article about it and got the date and the time. And then Richard said to FOIA Kirkland Air Force Base, mishaps office. And so I did. And I got this big report back about it right here. And it was really interesting to read this. Of course, like so many wonderful documents we get when we send FOIAs. Let me find the one. It's the radio transcripts. A lot of the best juicy information is redacted out. But I learned that these were scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base. Here, look at this one, this page right here.
Can't read much there.
Scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base at night. Supposedly it was an instructor and a student, and they had 255 live rounds of ammunition on board, which I find interesting since they're flying over like Elizabeth and people's residential homes, and they're with a student. I think it's highly suspicious. And in there, it says one of the causes of the crash is that both pilots ejected, both survived, by the way. But they said one of the causes of the crash was that the instructor misidentified the beacon lights of another aircraft. but nowhere in the radio tower transcripts or anywhere else in all of all those documents does it identify what that other aircraft was. It doesn't say it was a Cessna or whatever. And I find, and it was like one of like 6 different causes. So I find that highly suspicious. And then when I was at David Marler's a few months back, going through his archives, trying to dig more documents and articles out, I did find a cool one, Elizabeth. But there was an incident out of the Canadian NORAD where, I mean, it was the front page of the paper and documents of that they had scrambled a couple jets in pursuit of UFOs because they had some unidentified things on their radar. So I thought, and it was around that same time, I don't remember exactly the year, it was 75, 76, somewhere in there. And I'm thinking, if they've done it before, why wouldn't they do it in that case, And they even, for a time, according to Bill Waugh's widow, Jean and Keith, they actually had a no-fly zone over the town of Kiowa for a while because the mutilations were happening so frequently that, and they had the cattle associations had a $10,000 reward, which in the mid-70s was a lot of money. People were actively trying to seek these people out. They had loaded shotguns by their door. Like Keith was saying, you don't go up to anybody's house at night, without unannounced, because people were really, really on edge. People were terrified. So Bill Waugh says that they would go up, him and George Yarnell were up in airplanes quite often, looking for perpetrators. And another big theory at the time were these satanic cults or cults, whatever. That was a theory in the day. I think we could safely rule that one out. But he actually witnessed an unidentified craft very in close proximity where he could even see beings in the craft, and it took off at a 90-degree angle really quickly. So he witnessed something up in the sky when he was up in an airplane. So
wow,
yeah,
there's so many reports, and it's just and it's important to dig back to these,
it really is. That's, people ask, like, this happened so long ago. Why are you so obsessed with it? And well, number one, it's personal to me, and it's impacted my whole life, really, and my sister and family and others. But number two, we don't have answers, and and even as we speak, as this information is getting out, and that's why it's important to do these podcasts and to go speak conferences and to write the book and that, because that's how you connect with other people. I could research this till the cows come home, no pun intended, and nobody would know anything about it if I didn't share it. And so just the other month, a gentleman by the name of Brad reached out to me who kind of got in the middle. He knows Jeffrey Sailors and some of the other sheriffs involved out there, and some of them are still alive and are willing to talk now. And so here's 2 other people that are going to come forward. So it's even after all these decades, it's not too late to talk to these people, and we need to do it before it is too late, to try and get as much information as we can.
Yeah, I know when Tom Adams and his crew first went out to San Luis Valley in 1970, they were finding quite a number of people involved with the Snippy case.
Yeah.
That which actually later they found out was actually a lady that the press had misnamed the horse. That Snippy was actually alive and well. But there were a lot of strange things, and there was actually 3 different people who had collected samples around where the horse had been found, and each one of those claimed that they had been burglarized, and the only thing taken was samples.
Really?
And then later on, the Burley Lewis cabin that they had, I think it was close to the sand dunes, and there were a lot of strange things that happened there. And Mrs. Lewis, the owner of the horse, had kept a journal. They found this journal, this cleanup crew, because it was changing ownership. And Chris O'Brien mentions this in one of his books, Secrets of the San Luis Valley, I think. Anyway, there's suddenly the crew finds this, and they're looking at pictures. There's even robed beings with symbols on the robes, and
I'd be curious
descript.
to know what that symbol is, but okay.
Yeah, it was. I describe it. I'll send you the link to the article I wrote on it. Was described along with a mention of craft and some reports that had been made that she kept in this journal. But after looking at it, the crew went back to work, and suddenly there were two guys that just left. And when they left, the journal was gone. And each group thought that these two guys were helping, that they were friends of the other people, and then they found out, well, we don't really know who the heck.
Oh no! That's so interesting because Jean, Bill Waugh's widow, was telling me that the CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and he said that his dad referred to these other gentlemen and he called them suits. So whoever came in and confiscated all his pictures from the mutilations, and he was actually told to kind of downplay the whole problem and to say that the majority of them were cattle kill. So he was told to lie about it after a while. And they were telling me about a map that he had in the police station where they were mapping out the different mutilations that were occurring, and some of them that were happening really close to one another in time and date, from Montana to Wyoming to Colorado to Texas, Utah, Nebraska, and Kansas. So basically down the whole Midwest there. Of course, Colorado was hit the hardest. Elbert County was hit the hardest. And did you say Tom Adams? Was that the name you said?
Yeah, Tom Adams.
Did he do a book called The Choppers and the Choppers? Was
Yeah.
he part? I have that. And to me, that is very invaluable information because that was a whole other phenomenon happening at the time, that these unmarked copters were menacing people and chasing young kids, and there are articles about it. And when I found out about that publication, The Choppers and the Choppers, I had a hard time finding it. And the only person that had it was Klaus Swan out of Sweden at the AFU. So he was gracious enough to send me the PDF copy of that. And that is, they did some fantastic research on that whole phenomenon. I mean, down to, how many per month during the day, how many of these were seen at night and how many in the day and what day of the week and, what months were most active and on and on and on. So kudos to them. And you said you knew him?
We corresponded, yeah. And he was, I was, as I say, a young teenager. I even had a little mimeograph newsletter, and he was one of my consultants at the time. At the time, Lauren Coleman was one of my consultants, actually.
Wow.
I was living in Maine. He was in Illinois. Now I'm in Tennessee, and he's in Maine. But
that's amazing. Yeah. So have you ever been out to the Colorado area?
Yeah, I went out in August of 2008 or somewhere thereabouts, and I flew into Albuquerque, New Mexico, my wife and I. I was going to speak at the UFO Watchtower out there.
All right, I've not been there. I need to get out there. You think of.
And so we met with a lady, Priscilla Wolf, who was actually one of Brad Steiger's correspondents, and she lived outside of Albuquerque, and she was going to speak at the UFO Watchtower. So she said we could come there, would fly in, and they would drive us to their home.
Nice.
And we could stay there and then drive up to Colorado together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite interesting. She was Native American, Apache, along with half Apache, half Spanish, and she told lots of wild and interesting stories. She introduced me to a sister of hers who described some story. I have to look it up to get the details right, but she claimed, I think, living in Hermosa, that a helicopter came down and she could see the occupants, and she felt threatened by them, and they were just like treetop, and I thought, this just doesn't sound real. I mean, in broad daylight,
Yeah, it was real. I mean, it's unbelievable. Do you believe, and did she believe, and because I get asked this question, and I've done, research on the history of Elbert County and Kiowa and the land, and do you believe that there's a Native American connection to this? I mean,
Well, she did, and we visited a 17-mile long mesa outside of Albuquerque that has thousands of Indian petroglyphs or rock carvings on them.
mhm.
And she was describing that's a skinwalker and this is that. And I don't know if she really correctly identified all these things she was telling, but
Mhm.
they were. But what was interesting is that I put her in touch with a gentleman who had studied such sites from England down to Central America, and he said that the strongest, most powerful one was this mesa that was composed of volcanic rock, and
Interesting.
he had instruments that would pick up this electrical energy, and
Right. And that's something I looked into, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but all of these high strangeness locations, including Bradshaw and Skinwalker and Blind Frog and Marley Woods, and there's another one in Ohio, Pennsylvania, called the UFO Preacher Case that Stan Gordon wrote about. And the Elbert County Ranch, they all ping the charts as being extremely highly magnetic areas. And now, of course, we have David Pilates out there doing the Missing 411, and he just did his film, The UFO Connection, and he's talking about these aquifers underground,
mm-hmm.
some near Wyoming and north. So, I wonder, and what that has to do with the phenomenon itself, the water, the electromagnetism. I don't know.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know either. It was what was interesting to me was that he started out. He was working with Nancy Talbot,
Mm-hmm.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, who was over in England studying crop circles, and she invited him along, and he was using these these instruments to detect. He had ground leads and to detect magnetic fields, real expensive equipment.
Right.
And he had studied some about geophysics in college, and so he was applying this. And pretty soon he realized he went from crop circles to ancient sites, and he found it really fascinating that a lot of the sacred sites that the natives built, different things, pyramids, circles, whatever, was ground zero for high, geomagnetic anomalies.
Right.
And
That's so interesting.
and so this one this 17-mile long one, I wanted to visit it because of what he wrote. He wrote a book on the subject. His name was John Burke. He has since unfortunately passed away, but Nancy put me in touch with him, and with Priscilla, we went up to Colorado, went to the conference, and then on the way back, stopped at a place in southern Colorado, close to where it was west of the San Luis Valley there. And anyway, she showed us this volcanic hill,
Mm-hmm.
extinct, but she said that when she was a child that she would see these discs and they would fly into the volcano.
Yeah, I've heard
And
that.
I said, okay, do they go in the top? No, she said they just flew into the side.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what I've heard.
like,
Yeah.
And she called it like a gateway to other worlds or something. And there were lots of stories and legends she was sharing, and people were seeing like in that area like a black robed priest who could disappear or something, and then talking about seeing balls of light. And she put me in touch with another Native American medicine woman. I didn't meet her, but I wrote to her, and she was describing how she had this experience as a young girl of she came from an abusive family, and she was spending the night along some creek. She was very young, something like 11 or so, but she woke up in the morning and there was like this energy around her, and everything was blue, and she was seeing like this like a woman figure with a blue aura.
Yeah.
And she developed what I think a lot of near-death experiences develop, synesthesia and multiple sensing. And she would see things, and she would know psychically what it meant. Like telling, like there's an owl down the road,
Right.
And
It's so interesting you bring that up because that's another piece of the puzzle I've been investigating. Just because um, these things that I don't know if you'd call them attached to me or I experienced or whatever. I start because I too had a very traumatic childhood, with different things. And so I started looking into people who have near death experiences, people who go through trauma tend to disassociate, and people who disassociate, and has been researched by a lot of PhDs, tend to tap into something else, whatever you want to call them. And so I find that piece really fascinating. Now, again, this affected so many different people across the board, so I can't just say, oh yeah, it impacted me. But there is something to that, I think, as far as like the shadow figures, these blue orbs, the spirit guides or whatever you want to call it, and maybe even into the Native American traditions. So yeah.
Now, when it comes to energy, Peter Jordan worked with a group in New Jersey called Vestigia back in the 70s, and they had a spook light there. Even Persinger was involved in it. The Canadian.
Is that kind of like a fairy light? Is that sort of the same thing?
It was a light, a ghost light that was called locally, that would follow a railroad track along.
Oh,
And there's a number of those across the country.
right.
In this instance, they had about $30,000 worth of equipment. Some of it they manufactured themselves. These were people who worked on little projects, electronics and stuff, and they were apparently pretty skilled at it. Dr. Berthel Schwartz, I think, was a consultant. Locally from Alabama, Thomas Bearden, if that rings a bell, he was corresponding with him, finding out what was going on. And John Keel was following, I think, through Peter Jordan. Peter Jordan was very involved. And Peter Jordan wrote an article, and they solved it. It was actually quartz crystals in the ground, and there was local seismic activity, and it would generate through the tracks an electrical field.
That makes sense.
And when the tracks were later pulled up,
it went away.
It went away.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that John Durr, Ph.D., I tracked him down, and he sent me some paper and work he did on earthquake lights. And I think that is groundbreaking research, and I'm sure that there's that phenomenon. However, it doesn't explain the whole body of high strangeness,
No.
And on Saturday, we had Dr. Simeon Hine as our guest here at Colorado MUFON. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Simeon Hine did a lot of work around crop circles and whatnot. And even though, even some of the man-made ones, because he measured electromagnetism in these crop circles, both the man-made ones and the ones that maybe weren't man-made. And they even go higher in magnetism than the light pink. It goes into this like yellow red. So they're super highly magnetically charged. So in my opinion, that is, a key piece of evidence to all these high strangeness locations. And I hope that more researchers get out there and figure this out. And he was saying something about something to check, or I don't know if they're isotopes or something in the soil where we can look at that and measure it. So I'm like, oh, maybe you can help us this spring or summer out there to do some testing out there.
Yeah, that sounds quite interesting. Whatever the explanation, I mean, there's things in the earth that maybe these things can tap into too. Some of it's natural and some of it is borderline supernatural.
Supernatural. Yeah. I think, outside we can visually see and experience with our five senses just this little tiny. And I think these things just lay right outside of that, when we get glimpses of it. That's what I think is happening.
And I think some of the abilities of the shamans of old are kind of like the modern contact experiencers. They're And it it has to do with the environment that some of them are in that pulls this awareness and some of these experiences. Because it seems like people with close encounters and contact experiencers, they have a higher percentage of, paranormal experiences, psychic experiences than the average,
Yeah, that
person.
is true, and that can get a little scary sometimes. I describe it as like plugging in a cord and unplugging it, and I sometimes if I get back into that lane or whatever that energy is, and I
Mhm.
plug in, it gets a little too much. So I'll unplug it again because it can be a little frightening sometimes to experience that. Or, um, no, I don't claim to be a psychic or anything, but I've had a few incidences that were pretty profound where I was connecting with something and somebody else, and that's quite a responsibility because you're dealing with people's loved ones and I found it to be overwhelming, and so I'd rather unplug the cord and not
Mhm.
have that
Yeah,
responsibility.
yeah.
But
My
that's
interviews with Peter Jordan, we've been talking about that, and he says that um, he was involved heavily for 30 years, all these different things, and then he finally backed away.
yeah.
And because I knew John Keel and Dr. Swartz, and he did, we kind of recently developed a report. I brought him out to do a series of interviews with me, but he said that you talk with these people and they're having these experiences, and you pick up on these emotions and things, and it you go really deep into it. And sometimes he says you just need to cut loose and back up from it.
Right, exactly. That's so true. And I think that's why it's taken me so long. And even writing the book, my new book, I'm like 4 chapters in, but for me, it's this process of not only investigating because there's so many rabbit holes to go down and I want to be thorough. Like, one whole chapters just on the history of the town itself and, some of the past things that have happened there. But it's also personal to me. So not only are you researching and learning, but you have to process, process that stuff. And it takes time to do that because, like you said, you have to take it in, process it, and then kind of distract yourself with something else because it's too much sometimes. So it's taken me a long time to get to where I am today, and
Mhm.
people are like, well, if you were threatened and warned never to talk about it, why are you talking about it now? And I feel like the three sons, all the adults that were living there at the time have passed away, unfortunately. And the three sons, I'm friends with one of them on Facebook, and I've corresponded a little bit, but they've all moved out of the state of Colorado. They all are very religious and lead very different lives right now, and they don't want to go revisit that scary time in their life. They're still traumatized by it to the point where they just are like, I can't even deal with it at all. And I feel like for me, I'm just so far removed from it. Like I was only there a handful of times and I just heard secondhand that's why I'm able to kind of really dig deep into it. Although it didn't impact me at home, but I always thought that was more the paranormal stuff and I didn't connect it to the ranch. And so it's kind of all convoluted, but I just feel like I was removed enough from the ranch that, I feel more comfortable researching it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I go through some periods where I get upset sometimes because if it was the military out there doing black access projects, and there was some notes in Dr. Leo Sprinkles that it said Warren, and then his last name was redacted out. So Warren blank. So Warren, if you ever hear this and you're still alive, reach out to me. But it said Warren blank from Camp Carson visits the ranch. He felt something take over his mind, which made him walk towards the woods. This would release him. He would run back to the ranch house, and this did this to him 5 times. And I'm thinking, what the
Hmm.
heck is that? Is that sounds like DARPA? It sounds like mind control. It sounds, and number two, why is Warren blank from Camp Carson on the ranch property at all? You know, and why is NORAD and people from the Air Force Academy or telling the sheriff bluntly to forget about UFOs and Bigfoot reports and that they're going to handle it? And so another person I heard from after Laughlin was Bob Solis. And Bob Solis had written me a very nice email talking about soldiers in 1977 at Maelstrom that were given lie detector tests if they had witnessed these Sasquatch and UFOs encounters. And there was a sketch that Sands did sketches of the Sasquatch creature up in Montana in 1977 that is an almost identical match to the sketch that was in Dr. Sprinkle's files from the Elbert County Ranch from the same time period. And these aren't your typical looking Sasquatch creatures. These have like round eyes, this funny nose, this mouth, and this kind of not real thick hair. And my mom at the time would refer to these Bigfoot Sasquatch creatures seen in Elbert County as white fuzzies. And I think she referred them that way because they were like gray, white haired. And I think she didn't want them to be so scary sounding to me since I was 9, 10, 11 years old at the time. And at the time, there was a popular book called TAs for Tots, and they talked about white fuzzies and cold pricklies. So that was like, I had that book with me all the time. So she said, yeah, they're white fuzzies. And that's how I remember them being described. You know, so me and my sister, when we talk about it, we're like, remember the white fuzzies? And interestingly enough, my sister, because she went to prom out there it was like a graduating class of like 7 out there in Kiowa, and she went to prom with the oldest son. And they went back to the ranch house after prom, and they didn't stay very long because she was terrified. They were terrified. I mean, being on that property, even in the day, was like eerie. It was a heavy feeling. And she told me, she goes like almost matter of fact, like, yes, the Sasquatches were connected with the UFOs. She didn't know if they were bodyguards or workers or what, but she felt a direct connection to the two, which would make sense to me because that area is not somewhere that you would have a population of Sasquatch, you know, all the time. You would see them, you would have evidence of that. So they had to have been interdimensional or connected to the craft, in my opinion. And they were spotted by several witnesses, not just one person or two, but several.
Yeah.
I was going to say, they actually, in the report, said they got the footprints, castings, and hair samples. I don't know what happened to those. Again, gone.
Huh. Wow. I do remember Tom Adams saying that, writing way back along, that Dr. Hynek and Sprinkle both had showed up in the San Luis Valley to look things over. So maybe that's in, Dr. Sprinkle's vast archives there too. It should be.
I wonder if Hynek was aware of the ranch in Clearview. I wonder.
I would say he surely was. I mean, he had his fingers in so many different pies there,
Yeah. Interesting.
But I remember Tom Adams saying, though, that there was somebody in Colorado who worked closely with Hynek, and Hynek came in for a visit and then said, wow, how come nobody ever told me about all this activity? And it turned out that his friend, who was supposed to keep him informed of activity in that area, never said a word about it.
Oh, wow. It was fascinating to me. So my grandfather, George Nelson, lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And he was a Navy man and was a Freemason. And anyway, he had a sighting in the early 60s over Lake Como of an oblong-shaped craft. And he reported it, and it was investigated by none other than J. Allen Hynek. And then my mother, my sister, and I, going back and forth from Lake Geneva, because I was originally born in Illinois, and we lived in Des Plaines, across the border in Richmond, Illinois, we had 2 sightings of the same oblong-shaped craft. And my mom recalls one time we pulled over the Buick. It was by a billboard that this oblong-shaped craft was hovering there. And it was kind of like, you have your family story. She's like, Katie, that's when you got zapped, because I was just a toddler in the front seat. Back in the day, you just had these seats, it wasn't like today in these car seats. And she said I was like catatonic after that sighting. Like they had to like shake me to come back to my senses after that sighting. So that's interesting that J. Allen Hynek was involved.
So did you see that? I mean, did she say you saw the craft, or you just seen?
Yeah, I mean, the whole family did. We pulled over to the side of the road. The whole family did. I don't remember that. I was like 1.5 years old. I mean, I moved out to Colorado in 1970, so I was really young.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't recall that, but that's the family story of that. And then, of course, my grandfather's sighting as well in Wisconsin.
But I think Hynek was becoming aware of a lot of things that Jacques Vallée helped him a lot in becoming even more. The Air Force didn't really give him an education on UFOs,
Yeah.
but Vallée introduced him to close encounters, and
Right.
the fact that they leave circles on the ground. It's not necessarily done by a bunch of teenagers.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. I always laugh about Close Encounters because Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out in 1977. So this is right in the middle of all the stuff going on at the ranch. And until just like a few years ago, it dawned on me. I'm like, was I the only person who thought that was a documentary? It's just because I was so close to home. That's how I viewed that movie. It's like, oh, I'm living that kind of sort of in a way. So that was kind of funny. I'm like, oh, I bet nobody else thought of it that way.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I was in I was in the Navy, and I had to go to Great Lakes Naval Training Academy, right close to Evanston, where Hynek lives. So I made it a point to call him up, and I called him up several times, and he was always busy. And he said, "Well, if you'll buy my book that just came out, the UFO Evidence, the UFO Experience, I will meet with you. And we'll have
my book first.
We'll have something to talk about. We'll have some common ground." Says, "Okay, sure."
Well, thank you for your service.
Yeah. So I did. This was in September of '72, and there was some guy there. I wrote down his name. I don't know really. He looked like he was some college professor, and he just seemed to just sort of stand off to the side, just let us talk about UFOs. But I mentioned John Keel. I thought, okay, now we'll see what happens. And I expected, that he was going to say, "Oh, that lunatic." But no, he said, I find his ideas quite interesting. And I thought, that's interesting, because I find out later that other people had met him and said, yeah, he was becoming more open-minded, but he didn't want to really come out in the public and express his ideas on possible interdimensional or the psychic elements. But
yeah, that's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because as an investigator and a researcher, you have to stay really grounded in facts and documents, and at the same time, as an experiencer that witnessed some of these things, I'm like, well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
And I try to look at as objectively as I can and go, well, okay, this could be faked or that could be, it's hard because you want to be taken seriously and you need to be taken seriously. So, but at the same time, you can't deny some of the high strangest things. So it's just this thing that I'm always constantly battling too.
Yeah. Well, I know I told you an hour, and I think we're 2 minutes over here, so I will not. Everybody, I know you got
Yeah, we could talk for hours on that. I mean, I could anyway, but yeah.
Well, maybe I'll convince you into doing another interview sometime.
Yeah, that would be great. Anyway. I'm learning so much from you as well, so that's why it's so great. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to send you the link to the article that I wrote on the San Luis Valley recently, because there was so many things. He sent me like I think 23-page report back in 1970 on their first trip, and then some other letters, and there were just things there I thought were quite intriguing, and including the fact that the Lewis cabin, they were allowed to, these young men, to camp out there some, and while they were there, something tried to break into the cabin, and when they came outside, there were large three-toed prints, kind of like Stan Gordon's out of Pennsylvania,
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, we didn't even get into that. There was supposedly a large bird sighted at this place too, like a phoenix type of bird, and I've heard of thunderbirds and different things. So there's like cryptos. I don't know. It's scary stuff. I don't know what that is. So
yeah. Wow. Well, anyway, we will. I'll, as I say, I'll send you that link, and I want to keep in touch. My correspondence doesn't always go too good, but I'll do my best and share things with you. And I appreciate you taking this time to chat with me. It's been very, very intriguing, fascinating. there's just a lot to this stuff, and
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Like I said, I learned so much from you as well. And do you have a copy? I'm sure you do, of the Choppers and the Choppers, because if not, I'll send that PDF to you.
I think I believe I do. I know he sent me lots of stigmatas and the
Yeah.
crux, and I think I do. Yeah, if I don't, I'll be asking.
Yeah, let me know, because I have
What
sent
I
it to
got
you.
what I got to do is I got to look around this. I got 2 rooms devoted to all this. I got 7 filing cabinets, you know, old clanky
Right.
things, and boxes and bookshelves, and
Like my room up here is surrounded by
yeah,
stuff. It's
yeah, it's
amazing what we collect. And
lots
then
of.
we inherit collections as well, which I appreciate.
Yeah,
Uh,
I was told I should put everything on digital, but I'm afraid that something might, you know,
yeah,
me
we
and
all need to have a plan, because I'm like, my stuff will go to David Marler's, although I'm sure a lot of this, I got a lot of his extras, and he'll, but
Mhm.
what he doesn't have needs to be, archived, so it doesn't get lost. There's been so many valuable collections that have just been lost through the years, and it's a shame.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, thanks again, and you
Yeah,
take
thank
care,
you.
and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye bye.